morning, River Valley. How are we doing this morning? I'm good. Thank you for asking. That's so kind. So you may not recognize me. My name is Tim Sorenson. I'm one of the associate pastors here, and I've had the joy of serving with my wife here for the past few years. We've been in youth ministry. We've been with the young adults. She leads worship, and but one of the more fun things we've been able to do is serve out at our Murphy campus together out at Lincoln Savage. So that's been a lot of fun, and today I get to be here with you guys. So I'm super excited, and we're continuing our journey through God's space. If you've been with us for the past few weeks, we've been going through God's space, and I don't know about you, but this has been a real eye-opener for me. This has been good. It's just one of those where you're kind of, preparing to teach it, but here you are kind of getting taught more than you're teaching. It's opened my eyes to this idea of just creating these spirit-led, natural, spiritual conversations. Today, we look at the idea of wondering, the idea of wondering yourself into spiritual conversations. Some of you might wonder what that means, and to break it down, it's this idea of asking good questions, the power of good questions and conversations with people that may or may not know the Lord. Looking back, I think if you asked a lot of Christians, and maybe even yourself, the person next to you, you said, how did you get to that decision to know God, to love God? And they might, kind of like myself, just say, at some point in my life, I was able to sit down with somebody and they let me talk. They let me ask questions. They wondered with me, essentially. And they wondered back. Sadly, on the other end of that, you might ask somebody who maybe is just afraid of church, doesn't want to have anything to do with anything church related at all. And you say, hey, I'm just curious, kind of how did you kind of get to this decision or this feeling? How are you like that? And they might say, I sat down and had a conversation with somebody and I asked questions and they just wanted to be right. Their priority was making sure that I knew that I was wrong in what I was thinking. So today we're going to look at just the power of wondering with people and asking good questions. And by the way, if you are somebody who maybe today's the first day, you're like, you know what, I don't like church, but I'm here because somebody invited me. We're glad you're here. I hope you're encouraged by this message. I hope we all are encouraged by this message. But first off, I want to take a look at some of our greatest wonderers. Why not use the example of people who have wondered greatly for hundreds of years. I'm not talking about Aristotle. I'm not talking about Plato. I'm not talking about C.S. Lewis. I'm talking about kids, right? Kids, some of our greatest wonderers, some of our biggest question askers. I've worked again in our student ministry. I worked at the Boys and Girls Club, and some questions that the younger people would ask me, I'm just like, how did that question come to your mind? But I want to look at some of the most commonly asked questions by kids. For those of you that are parents, I hope this is maybe a little trip down nostalgia lane that some of your kids might have asked you these questions. But the first one that even stumps me as an adult today is, Mom, Dad, why is the sky blue? Why is the sky blue? And my answer is, well, duh, blue's the color that God used to paint it. Like, that's the answer. There's no scientific reason. God made it that way. Why is the sky blue? Another one a kid might ask, and you might just be like, why are you even thinking about this? But Mom, Dad, are we rich? Are we rich? And that's when you say, we are rich. Our treasures are stored up in heaven. And that's the way that God made it. Another one, and as a Jurassic Park or Jurassic World fan, this one kind of bums me out, but why are there no more dinosaurs, right? Why are there no more dinosaurs? Another question that they might ask. I think a lot of you parents knew this one was going to be on the list at some point when I said weird questions kids ask, but Mom, Dad, where do babies come from? Right? I'm not a parent yet, but I kind of dread that one. I'm hoping that when that day happens, they're going to ask that question. I'm going to say, Rachel, this one's all yours, and I'm going to go do something else. But I've been told, though, in case you don't know, it is the stork, right? There's a factory somewhere, you call it the stork, and they just send you a baby. That's what I hear. But kids can get deep, right? They can get pretty deep. They might ask, Mom, Dad, what happens when you die? What happens when we are no longer on this earth? And another one is, Mom, Dad, where does God live? Where does God live? As a kid, I used to think there was a big wooden floor beyond the clouds, right? And to my amazement, when I walk out on a clear day and there's no wooden floor up there, my mind was blown. And I had to go ask my parents that question. But I want to encourage us today that wondering isn't just for kids. Christ calls us to have this childlike faith, to have the boldness that children have in asking questions to ourselves, asking questions with other people. As done with our other messages and other parts of our series here in God's Space, when done correctly, when done with love and a genuine heart, wondering can be very, very powerful. Questions were a big part of Jesus' ministry. There are 339 recorded questions in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. 339 questions that Jesus used in his ministry. The cool thing is with wondering, we have this ability to plant seeds for the future, right? Plant seeds in people's heart for the future. I know as a believer, something I struggle with though, and I don't know if I'm alone, is that I put the pressure on myself to be the one to lead someone to Christ. If I'm there in the beginning, I want to be there in the middle, and I want to be there in the end. It kind of awkwardly becomes the me show, right? And I put all this pressure like, oh my gosh, if I don't take this opportunity right now, that person will never know God, right? That selfish thought enters into my mind. But again, I want to encourage us, guys, that we are the vessels to share God's word. We are not the destination. We are not the final stop. That is their time with God. I'm reminded that I am doing God's work. I am not doing Tim's work. I'm not doing my work, because that wouldn't be very fun at all. And if you are a believer here, we get to do God's work, and that's really exciting. So we're going to look at a few things today, but I want to start us off before we start filling in those boxes on your guys' notes. And the first point, though, is we need to be able to allow ourselves to wonder. That's your first fill in the blank. Allow yourself to wonder. If we're going to enter into spiritual conversations with people, if we're going to ask some questions that might encourage deep thinking, we need to be willing to do the exact same thing with ourselves. I want to encourage us to put ourselves in that situation where we ask a question and we go, whoa, wait, what? Like, I don't have the answer. And I want us to be okay with not having the answer. I know for me as a leader in some ministries, I have kind of a box of things that I feel comfortable talking about. Things I think I have at least an 85% grasp of understanding. And quite frankly, this box is really small. And so I have that. And if you ask me a question, you have a concern, and it falls in that box, great, let's go. But you ask me a question outside that box, I'm like, uh-oh. We need to be willing to ask those questions to ourselves that are outside that box. I want to encourage us, get a little edgy, get a little risky with our question asking. Be okay with not knowing the answers right away. And this is a cool thing. If we're talking to people, right, we don't need to always have the answer if they ask a question. If you're like, okay, I need to give them an answer, that could be dangerous because you could be giving them the wrong one. Be okay with saying, you know what, I don't have that answer right now. Let's figure it out together. We need to ask ourselves the tough questions. And why I'm encouraged by this, guys, is because, again, as a believer, if we ask ourselves the tough questions, guess what? We got the creator of the universe on this journey with us, guiding our steps. He lit this fire for eternity in our hearts, and he lights the steps of our path. Like, we have God, creator of the universe, with us on this journey. We are not alone, and that's why I'm encouraged. Ecclesiastes 3:11 says this, it should be on the screen for you. It says, yet God has made everything beautiful for its own time. He planted eternity in the human heart, but even so, people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end. So we all have this desire for eternity. Okay, we all have this desire for that curiosity, like the kid asked, what happens when we die? And for us as believers, we get the joy of having the opportunity to walk alongside people as they go on that journey themselves. So again, allow yourself to wonder, allow yourself to be curious, and just be okay with not having all of those answers quite yet. Remember what Christ shared with his followers in Matthew 7. He says, ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and it will be opened. For everyone who asks receives, everyone who seeks finds, and to whoever knocks, it will be opened. So you ask and he gives. And you seek and you find him. And you knock and he opens the door. Again, I'm reminded that's he, that's not me. That is he that is doing that. So I want us to look into the art or the ability to ask good questions. And keep in mind that as you wander into these spiritual conversations, that you might be sitting across from somebody from a very, very different lifestyle than you. Someone who doesn't understand like you understand and vice versa, and doesn't think like you think. I hope that we as believers get into those situations. And at the end of the first 4 points, I'm going to kind of apply a life application question. And just maybe something you're like, hey, that was a really good point, but I don't necessarily know what to do with it. And so I have a little question that we can take back, and I encourage us through our work weeks this week that maybe we're asking those questions with our coworkers. So point 1, what wondering is, it's a mutual desire to understand. It is not telling them they're wrong. You could even say it's a mutual desire to understand each other, not telling them that they are wrong. So wondering is going to take a lot of humility on our end, and that's something I'm going to say a lot throughout these points. It takes a lot of humility on our end to maybe change our thinking. But we need to have a mutual desire to understand where people are coming from, because then we get to apply other concepts of God's space. We get to serve them, right, by listening and noticing where other people are at. I had this thought that our innermost desire as a Christian is most likely to have other people understand the joy and the power of God, right? Our innermost desire is that people that are non-believers will soon become believers. They will understand the love and the power of God. For those of us that are Christians, whether it's been for 1 year or 5 years or 20 years or 60 years, that's something some of us are still working on, right? There's still things that I don't understand about the power of God. So we can't get aggressive or we can't get frustrated when somebody is unable or unwilling to grasp that concept after 1 or 2 cups of coffee with us. I've been meeting this person for a whole 2 weeks and they still don't understand. They're never going to. We can't have that mindset. Okay, we need to be patient, understand that they are on this journey of understanding just like we as Christians are. It's important to go into these conversations prepared and prayed up, right? We need to just be prepared, and we need to have a desire to understand them more passionately than we want them to understand us. We should be so eager to understand where they are coming from and learn about them. We can't be so caught up on wanting them to understand where we are at. Because you know what this is going to do when you really are just eager to understand with somebody. Let's say you are in this conversation with somebody and you work with them and they know enough to know that their lifestyle, what they do in their free time is something that your people or Christians would call a sinful lifestyle. They know that, so they've always kind of had this guard up, right? Whenever they talk to you, they have this shield. They're kind of afraid of maybe an attack. And so you're sitting with them and they're talking and your conversation gets to the point where they say, okay, I'm gonna try it out. I'm going to let them know that this is kind of the lifestyle I live. And so they share that, and they're embracing, they're ready for this attack that they've experienced with other Christians before. But you look them in the eyes and you say, you know what? I'm going to be honest. I'm not very familiar with that. Can you tell me more about it? Tell me more about you. I'm really interested in that. When they hear that response, you know what happens? They put their shield down, their walls come down, and they say, Okay, I get you. You actually want to know about me. Their walls come down and you start having that God space moment. I want to encourage us that just because somebody disagrees with us or just because we disagree with someone doesn't mean we discard someone. And I am really glad that Christ didn't have that mentality with me, right? Just because I have done things that have been sinful against him, or I have done things that are not good, that God wasn't like, we're done with him. In fact, Paul calls us in 1 Corinthians 11 to imitate Christ. Follow him as he follows Christ, or as he says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Understand with me as I strive to understand. I heard it put this way about Jesus, and I thought this was really cool. It says, Jesus never asks questions because he needs the answer. In fact, Jesus uses a question like a surgeon would use a scalpel. to delicately cut into a new level of understanding. I thought that point was really cool. He uses a question like a surgeon uses a scalpel to delicately cut into a new, deeper level of understanding. You look at some questions. I'm not going to go through all 339 because we would be here for way too long, but the power behind Jesus' questions, there's not like a yes or no answer. He's saying these things so that the listener goes into a deeper level of understanding. In Matthew 6, I'm paraphrasing, but he says, someone's kind of worried about being taken care of, and he says, well, look at the birds in the air. Like, look what they're doing. Are you not more valuable than the birds? Right? Just kind of, it's almost like a little stop and shake you moment. He says, don't you realize, like, I'm taking care of them. They're fine. And you are more valuable to me than the birds in the air. A really powerful one that we've probably all maybe asked ourselves in Matthew 8, he says, oh, you of little faith, why are you so afraid? Why are you so afraid? That's a good question for us to ask sometimes as we maybe step into this new kind of God space style of living. These questions lead the listener to just thinking deeply. A life application question that I mentioned earlier is, and you can write this down, there's no box for it if you want, but tell me more about blank. In your conversations with people, go to the next level. Tell me more about this. Don't take that opportunity to tell them more about something. You, tell me more about you. Again, the joy of somebody giving their life to the Lord will come from opportunities where Christians have allowed God to work through them and around them. Learn with me as I learn, which brings us to our second point of wondering, and that's creating an opportunity for you to learn, not creating an opportunity for you to teach. Creating an opportunity for you to learn, not an opportunity for you to teach. Newsflash, and I'm going to go ahead and speak for myself. I'll let you speak for yourself, but I don't know everything. In fact, I'm pretty sure my head would explode if I even knew a quarter of a half of everything. Asking questions allows us to learn things about people that we wouldn't have the opportunity to learn otherwise. That might be your opportunity to learn something that you never would otherwise. My wife, Rachel, some of you guys know her. She is fantastic at the art of asking questions. She's a mastermind with asking questions. So we went to the dog park. We live by a dog park, and we're kind of walking up, and I see this like teenage girl kind of sitting on the bench in the dog park smoking a cigarette, and I'm like, teenager smoking what? So I keep my distance because that's just me and my train of thought. But I didn't keep my distance because of that. I was actually following my dog because he likes to go ahead and do his business. And if you've ever been in a dog park, you know that if you don't pick that up, that's a big no-no. So I was following him. He was doing his own not wandering. And I'm in the earshot, and I just hear her talking to this girl. And she is asking question after question after question. She sits there, oh, hey, what's your name? Or where do you go to school? Oh, you live around here, blah, blah, blah. Where do you live? Oh, you go to school, so you know this person. Oh, I see you're reading. What do you like to read? What's your favorite subject in school? She is just like throwing all these questions. And I'm in earshot, and I'm like, okay, FBI agent Rachel, like you are interrogating this girl. I'm almost like, chill out. And this is kind of, again, the humbling thing for me is she wasn't interrogating. Guys, she was learning. She was learning more about this girl. And by the time we left, I feel like we just had enough about this girl to write a book about her, but we didn't do that. But here was the most mind-blowing thing about this is that the questions, they kept coming and coming and coming. And the answers kept getting longer and longer and longer and longer. This girl's walls were coming down, and it wasn't just yes or no's. She was actually starting to answer questions that weren't even asked. And so she was just giving Rachel the opportunity to learn. My mind was blown. I was like, okay, all right, the question thing is cool, but I'm going to leave that to her. So I think that there's this part in our hearts where we like to talk about ourselves. There's a desire to share with others about ourselves. We just need someone to listen. Right? We just need somebody that is willing to sit there and put their phone away and just listen to us. And again, we create the opportunity to learn about something that we may know nothing about, other worldviews, other beliefs. And what you relay to somebody when you are listening to them and you are learning about them, you understand, I value you. I value your heart, and I value where you're coming from. Something interesting, I've learned that the conversations Like the really good conversations I've had with people, the one where you walk away and you get the thanks for that text, right? Man, that did a lot. There's a common theme in those conversations I've had. I use my ears a lot more than I use my mouth. I learn a lot more than I teach or I talk in those conversations. So a life application question could just be any question that is about them. Any question that's about them, that's not too weird or invasive, but how are you? What do you like to do? Are you from here? And continue to follow up. Ask about them. Relay the message that I value you and what you have to say. What this does is this opens up to point number 3, and it builds a relationship. What wondering is, when done with the love of God, is building a relationship. It is not setting up an agenda. And I think this is one of those areas where I can get myself in trouble as well. But we've all been there, right? Where you've been talking with somebody and you can just sniff out that there is something else they're wanting to talk about. I've told my friends this. I'm like, if I know what you're trying to say before you actually verbally say it, I get weird. And I know there's something. So I either will shut down, or I will almost attack. I'll try and uncover what the real thing is, which generally kills the conversation, making it really awkward because I've just gotten randomly aggressive because I think there's something else to it. But I think we've all been there before where we're talking to somebody and it's like, hey, and you've gone through this conversation and you're like, all right, they said X, Y, and Z, but they really wanted to talk about something else. You can almost feel trapped in a sense, right? You almost feel trapped. Rachel has a rule with her first graders. She teaches first grade at Parkside, and she says if you're going to raise your hand to ask a question, you actually have to start that question with, I wonder, right? So a kid says this, and I wonder, or else this is what happens. They raise their hand, and teacher, well, actually, the second part is if you're going to say I wonder, it needs to follow up with a question. There needs to be a question if you're going to say I wonder, because otherwise they go, teacher, yes, do you have a question? I do. Okay, how do you start it? I wonder, my mom got a dog this weekend, and its name is Mac and Cheese. And guess what? It loves mac and cheese, and I love to feed it mac and cheese, right? So you're sitting there, and you're like, is there a question in there somewhere, right? And this is harmless, but that kid had no desire to ask a question. That kid wanted to talk about their new dog, Mac and Cheese, and they were going to take any opportunity, right? They had an agenda to talk about mac and cheese, and they took advantage of it. And sometimes if we lack tact as believers, if we lack Christ's love, our kind of conversations with people almost feel the same way. They almost feel like we are attacking them or trapping them into getting them into our conversation that we wanted. We are not letting it happen naturally, Spirit-led. We don't want people coming out of our conversation like they were blindsided or coerced, right? We don't want them feeling trapped. Nothing is going to put up walls, and this is a believer or a non-believer, nothing is going to put up walls faster than somebody just thinking that they were a name on a checklist, that they were just a target. You're like, okay, talk to them, check. Nothing is going to put up walls faster. Got a quote by my man, Dr. Seuss. He says, to the world you may be one person, but to one person you may be the world. And that's how we want people coming out of these conversations feeling like the world. We want them feeling loved. We want them feeling heard. We want them feeling valued by our time with them. We don't want them walking away saying, what did I just agree to? I don't know what just happened, but I agreed to something and I don't know what it was. We want them walking away saying, how cool is that? How cool is that? And we want them kind of excited for the next. We want them excited for the next conversation, whether that's with you, like, hey, that was a really cool time. I can't wait to talk to you again. Or even this cool thing about us being in this Christian family is that we want them to be excited for the next conversation they have with another Christian. They're like, oh, you're a Christian? Okay, I had a really good conversation with this other Christian. And they're kind of like, I really hope you're the same because this was fun. And they might actually be setting the seeds for that conversation. Our goal is that they're walking out of our conversation saying, I can trust that person. I want to know more about where they're at. So the life application question here could be not only the how are you, but why? A follow-up question. Like, hey, how are you? Oh, I'm good. Why? I've been guilty of saying, oh, how are you? Oh, not good. All right, see you later, right? And you walk away and they're just like, why did you even ask if you weren't too concerned about how I'm feeling? A bonus could be asking a follow-up question to something that happened a while ago, right? Hey, I heard you got a dog, Mac and Cheese, like a month ago. How's old Mac doing, right? You kind of ask a question. They're like, oh, you remembered, right? It kind of warms our heart when people remember that. And moving on to point 4, and I think this is pretty similar to point 2, but I think it doesn't deserve its own space. And what wondering is it's being ready to listen. It is not waiting to speak. Being ready to listen, not waiting to speak. You might have heard last week, if you were in any of the messages, I know some of the pastors use this verse in James 1:19. They say, understand this, my dear brothers and sisters, you must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. Going to be honest, out of all these points, if you're cool with it, I actually just want to skip this one, right? I've said the verse, I'll let you write down your point in your box, but I almost want to skip this point because this can be a pretty powerful and convicting point. To truly wonder through questioning, again, demands humility on our end, to be ready to listen, eager to listen, not ready to speak. But again, not that we shouldn't speak, right? We are, as believers, we're called to be prepared with a response. 1 Peter 3 says this, instead, you must worship Christ as Lord of your life. And if someone asks about your hope as a believer, always be ready to explain it. Always be ready. Some passages say, always be prepared to explain it. How often have you gone through a conversation and they say something you disagree with and it triggers you and you're like, boom, you're no longer listening to them, but in your head you're writing down 1,000 reasons why they are wrong. And then this is a weird concept, but what we do is we kind of wait for a polite opportunity to interrupt them. They're talking, they're explaining, they think you're listening and you're just going to wait for it. Boom, you're wrong and this is why, right? We get in those conversations and I'm not worried about what you're saying because I know that everything you're saying is wrong. I have an example of what not to do by yours truly. So I'm a football fan, and I'm a big fan of the Niners, right? Any Niners fans in here? Oh, there it is. All right. So I'm a big Niners fan, and don't get mad at me when I say this, for those of you that are football fans, but I personally think that Tom Brady is one of the best quarterbacks of all time. I have a strong belief that he is one of the best quarterbacks. So when I talk to people, my friends, and there are people that disagree with me, and they often will say, oh, I don't think Tom Brady's the best quarterback because. But here's the problem. I never know what the reasons are, right? Because I have stopped listening. I'm like, oh, you don't think Tom Brady's the best quarterback? Cool. Well, I'm going to write down 10 reasons why I think you're wrong, and I'm going to say them whenever I am done with my 10 reasons. I'm just chomping at the bit. Like, oh, if they have to take a breath or take a drink of water, I'm going to insert myself, and I'm just going to go for it, and I'm going to tell them why they're wrong. But Christ is like, no, Tim. Literally the exact opposite of what you are doing. Be quick to listen and slow to speak. We should be passionately hungry about what other people are saying. We should be so fixated on them about what they are saying that they know that we value them. So let's remove football from that, right? I thought that was kind of a safe topic, but let's insert a number of hot topic items in our everyday world. Maybe these topics are coming up in your work every day. Take out football, put in politics, right? You're at work and someone says, I feel blank, blank, blank about Trump, right? A lot of us are like, oh, you don't even want to mess with me. Like they didn't ask you into the conversation, but you just insert yourself into that conversation and possibly damage a relationship. Religion, God or gods, however your coworkers might think, or your family members even. That's a big one. LGBT topics. Right? And some of these you're like, hey, these are off limits. We are not talking about these because we are going to fight each other. I'd encourage you that as we change our hearts, okay, make those available to talk about, but we have to change our heart to do it. Parenting strategies, that could be another one. Oh my gosh, you raised your kid how? And we just start attacking each other. In today's world, though, I've noticed that there's a lot of keyboard warriors, right? It's being a millennial, there's a lot of people that just love sending left and right hooks behind a computer screen, right? And you've seen something, and you're like, they are so wrong. Now, I'm not going to read the rest of the post because that's a waste of time, and you're just like, and you get a long thing. Now, we don't pray over that. We don't send that to our friend and say, hey, what do you think about this post? So they can go, super no. Don't send that at all. We just sit there, we validate ourselves, we say, I am so right, they are so wrong, and we hit send. Again, damaging a relationship with somebody. I remember there was a time where, and this isn't the only time this has ever happened, but I was talking to somebody, and they were just 100% listening to me. Their eyes, their ears, their posture. It said, I value you. I value what you're saying. I am hanging on to every word coming out of your mouth. It kind of threw me off guard. It did. I think maybe I was used to people kind of not listening or getting distracted or talking to me while they're on their phones. And so I would actually just talk and trail off and be blah, 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 right? And not have anything to say. So when I was with this person, I picked my jaw up off the floor because I'm like, oh, they're listening to me. And I was making sure to be accountable to what I'm saying. And I had a lot more kind of behind my words, and I was ready to share what I was sharing. So I want us to have that mindset where we almost throw people off because we are listening to them so intently. And they're like, man, people don't do that. Why are you doing that? And then there's your God space moment. And again, I find myself oftentimes armed with a response as opposed to prepared, as Scripture calls. And I think there's a difference, okay? I'm armed with a response. I'm ready to strike whether they want it or not. I'm not prepared with a response for the hope that I have in Christ. One is very aggressive and the other one is very loving and Christ-like. So your life application question, it's a plot twist. It's not really a question, but sometimes silence. Let the floor be theirs. Now, I don't want you to think I'm literally saying silence is a question, like they're talking and you're like, silence, right? Because that's not a question, but let the floor be theirs. Let them talk. With this, it builds a partnership with the other person, which leads us to the last point. What wondering is it is us. What it is not is me versus you. Imagine there's this ravine, okay, and it's like, let's say it's 40 yards wide and just 1,000,000 miles deep. That's a really deep ravine. Sometimes this can represent those spiritual conversations that we get in. And on one side you have questions, and on the other side you have answers. I think our God space moments need to be where we are on the question side with the person that we're talking to, and we are actively working with them to build a bridge across to the answers. I lay a plank, you lay a plank, we nail it together. I lay a plank, you lay a plank. Sometimes, though, unfortunately, I think what it is we're over on the answer side and they're on the question side. And we're like, you're doing it wrong. You need to do this, do that. No, oh my gosh, do I need to come over there, right? Condescending, rude, creates confusion. They're like, well, they might just want to jump into the ravine instead of get to the other side where you are at. It's important to remember that we are on as much of a journey to understand those people as they are on a journey to understand the hope of God. Our journeys might be different, but we are on a journey with the people that we are talking to. We're on a journey with that person on the other side of the table from us, the person that's on the walk with us. We get that opportunity to ponder some of life's biggest questions together, and we have to remember it is us. It is not me versus them. I've been married for 5 years now, and to some of you, you're like, that's nothing, talk to me at 30. But I've learned a thing or two, or a million. And that's one thing I often remind myself in those tough conversations, in those disagreements where we're frustrated with you, that this is still us. This is us. This is not me versus you. This is two people that passionately care about us trying to overcome this disagreement. But the husband answer of I'm always wrong, and actually what it is it's me worrying about me versus you, and it's her actually caring about us. So as we enter into these conversations, we need to remind ourselves that there are two people on this journey. There are two people that are wondering. And that leads to our final point, and that's that our wondering should point to and reflect the heart of God. It should point to and reflect the heart of God. So there's a passage in John 13 that I'm going to get to in just a second, and it's highlighting Jesus washing his disciples' feet. Now, if you're not familiar with feet washing, it's just this humble act of service, right? It's telling somebody, I want to serve you by washing your feet. Now, some of us just have a phobia of feet, even when our feet are protected by socks and shoes. But back in the days of Jesus, they were walking around in sandals or bare feet, so they are traipsing through mud, animal fecal matter, human fluids, trash, just all this stuff. These feet were dirty. So in Jesus' time, the act of foot washing was a huge act of humility. So now you have Jesus the Savior of the world, the Son of God, washing his disciples' feet. And in John 13, verses 12, it goes like this. After washing their feet, he put on his robe again, and he sat down and he asked, "Do you understand what I was doing? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, because that's what I am. And since I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash each other's feet. I have given you an example to follow. Do as I have done to you. I tell you the truth." In verse 16, "Slaves are not greater than their master, nor is the messenger more important than the one who sends the message. Now that you know these things, God will bless you for doing them." So guys, this is important to remember. Jesus, he gave us an example to follow. That example was filled with healing. It was filled with serving. It was filled with love. It was not filled with me being right. It was not filled with me. It was love. It was listening. It was serving. I think about our times with those difficult people, and who am I to kid? Like, I am one of those most difficult people for others and myself as well. But when we come across those difficult people, how are we interacting in these conversations? How are we interacting with the people that disagree with us? And I'm reminded we follow Jesus, so I follow his example. And when I am difficult, what does Jesus do? He loves me. And in my pain and my hurt and my sorrow, what does he do? He listens to me and he heals me. And then in my sins and my transgressions, my direct attacks against God and my selfish lifestyle, what does he do? He sacrifices himself for me. He died for my sins in that regard. And that's what blows me away. That's one of those things that stops me and goes, whoa, what? Right? Is that love that he gave me. So I want to call the worship team back up here, and I just kind of want us to think about that love that Christ has given us. And the cool thing about today is that if you are somebody who has maybe recently made that decision to just love God, we get to celebrate with baptisms. Right, we get to celebrate with baptisms today, and if that's something you're interested to, a public declaration to say, church family, I have given my life to Christ, and I want to celebrate with you. Head on over to Rod over there in the prayer room, and we'll get you set up. But what a cool opportunity to celebrate with our church family. Pray with me. Father God, we thank you for this love that you give us. We thank you for the love that you have given for us, the sacrifice that you have given for us. God, I pray that we are able to just go into these spiritual conversations with just your love and humility, God. I ask that you just bless the rest of this time, and if somebody is wanting to get baptized, that you would just give them that final encouragement to walk over to the prayer room. We just give this day to you, and we love you. Amen. I'm going to ask our ushers to come take the offering. And if you're new to River Valley, this is totally just something for the church family. There is no obligation for you to give.
The splendor of the King, clothed in majesty, let all the earth rejoice, all the earth rejoice. He wraps himself in light, darkness tries to hide, and trembles at his voice, trembles at his voice.